Just a quick reminder that you can help support this channel on my Patreon site and get ad and sponsor-free content. The link is in the video description below. Thank you.
You're trying to intellectualize something desperately, and you're wasting your time.
Okay.
This is a film about magic. Leonora Carrington's paintings are populated with mythical creatures, alchemy, folklore, fairy tales, the occult, and human-animal hybrids. She was an artist who explored the limits of the imagination and was dedicated to free expression, especially when it meant breaking the rules. Her life reads like a Gothic fable. Born in 1917, she was a rebellious child who was expelled from 4 schools. Eventually, she fled the suffocating confines of her aristocratic upbringing, immersed herself in the Surrealist movement, and had a passionate relationship with artist Max Ernst, which ended when World War II broke out and Ernst was interred. Carrington suffered a mental breakdown and was forcibly detained in an asylum in Spain. She later escaped to Mexico, where she found creative freedom and lived most of her life. There, she conjured a language of symbols all her own, a secret grammar of transformation, rebellion, and curiosity. Her life is extraordinary, but so is the art she created, a true visionary. Carrington produced some of the most remarkable paintings of the 20th century, where beasts lurk behind every doorway, rituals unfold in dim-lit chambers, and women become cats, witches, and alchemists, architects of their own dark metamorphosis.
When I was a debutante, I went to the zoo every day.
Carrington was born into a life of wealth and privilege. Her father was a self-made industrialist, a domineering, strict, traditional man, and her mother was an Irish Catholic who loved to tell stories. She had 3 older brothers who were sent away to boarding school while she was left alone in a huge rambling mansion called Crookie Hall. Carrington herself once referred to Crookie Hall as a Gothic mansion haunted by the spirits of her ancestors. And this spectral, magical perception is echoed throughout her work, where real and imagined worlds intertwine freely.
Do you think anybody escapes their childhood? I don't think we do.
As a child, her mother, her grandmother, and her Irish nanny would tell her stories about Celtic folklore and mythology, telling her that her family was descended from an ancient and magical race who went to live underground after their land was taken by invaders. These mythical people were the Two Hardy Danann, also known as the Sidhe. They were a slender and beautiful race known for their intelligence and magical powers, and their ability to shapeshift. Sometimes they would entice humans into their realm, where vision, taste, and even time itself bore no relation to the world above. Eventually, the rebellious Carrington was sent away to a convent boarding school, but she was expelled, first from that school and then from a second one, and declared to be uneducatable.
I hated the nuns, and I hated the school.
Her parents then sent her to a school in Florence, part of her family's ongoing attempt to civilize her and mold her into a respectable lady. It didn't work. It was, however, in Florence that she encountered the great Renaissance artists that would influence elements of her compositions, as we shall see.
The London season is getting underway, a fact that's important to the debutante, if not to you. So here's the exclusive picture of the exclusive debutante's ball.
She then found herself in London, preparing for her appearance as a debutante. In the early 20th century, debutantes were young women from wealthy families ready to be introduced to society at grand balls. The aim was to find a suitable bachelor to marry and settle down. But this didn't work out either.
They wanted me to conform to the life of horses and hunt balls and being well considered by the local gentry, I suppose, that sort of thing.
She then began to study art seriously, against her father's wishes, and she joined an art academy in London. While studying, she began meeting other artists living in or passing through London, and in 1936 she met and fell in love with the famous surrealist Max Ernst. When her father found out that his 19-year-old daughter was involved with the 46-year-old Ernst, who by the way was already married, he was apoplectic. Furious, he tried to have Ernst arrested for creating so-called pornographic images, causing the couple to flee to Paris. Carrington was finally free from the restrictions her family forced on her and could pursue a life of creative expression with like-minded people. There in Paris, Carrington began to truly develop her artistic voice. Her wild imagination, combined with a talent for conjuring otherworldly scenes, quickly gained her recognition among the surrealists and their collectors. In Paris, Carrington began a period of intense creativity. As well as painting and drawing, she began writing her short stories and plays that the Surrealist group began to publish.
Very, very exciting moment in Paris because the Surrealist movement was at its height. I just felt in a constant state of rightness. You see, at that time I didn't have anything much. I knew it was better than being in a convent.
She also completed Self-Portrait Inn of the Dawn Horse in Paris, a painting she began in London in 1937. Remarkably, it is the first fully realised surrealist painting she created, one that really encapsulates ideas that she would pursue for the rest of her career. With this extraordinary painting, Carrington transcends mere representation and elevates painting to a magical act. The fact it is a self-portrait as a confident, independent woman is no coincidence.
I always had access to other worlds, like we all do. We all sleep, we all dream.
The setting is stage-like and reminds us of the Renaissance imagery she would have seen in Florence, of receding floors and cutaway distant views. Like the greatest surrealist works, the painting overall has an unsettling and otherworldly effect, like being underwater or caught in the weightless atmosphere of a dream. It starts with the composition, and the first thing we notice is that our eyes are being pulled in a circular motion around the image. The central focus is on Carrington herself, reaching out towards a lactating and smirking hyena. Carrington is clearly not inviting us in, but she is asserting her presence. Her direct, emotionless stare disrupts the tradition of women in portraiture being passive, shy, or symbolic. She is subject, not object. Her energy is masculine, with her spread legs and no visible sign of breasts. Her hand makes the sign of malediction, or the evil eye, often associated with the practice of magic, or as a curse, telling us clearly this is not a fairy tale. Magic is absolutely central to this painting, and all her art, writing, and worldview. Carrington strongly believed, even as a child, that the rational world could not explain the full scope of human experience. And as an adult, she studied magic in all its forms, as a symbolic system and spiritual worldview, blending them into her art and literature. She would come to see magic as a way to resist authority, whether that was the authority of her father, the church, the state, or the male-centric surrealist canon. It provided a language and logic that was personal, feminine, and inherently non-linear. In the painting, Carrington wears white jodhpurs and a green riding jacket, while her wild hair seems animated by invisible forces and clearly resembles a horse's mane. The boudoir-like chair she is sitting on seems strangely alive, with its red and shiny seat resembling an open mouth or an unfurling tongue. Look closely at the armrest. It has a hand that echoes her own. The chair's legs are tiny Victorian lace-up boots, much like Carrington's. The idea of anthropomorphic living furniture was one that both she and Remedios Varo, her close friend in Mexico City, would use repeatedly in their work. The chair is too small for her, and so she is forced to perch on the edge, stiff and awkward. Her masculine clothing and posture contrast with the soft, unnerving feminine energy of the chair. Her spiky-heeled stilettos are a stark, unpractical contrast to her jodhpurs, and are likely a reference to fetish wear and dominatrix, a surrealist preoccupation with many of the male artists. Floating behind her is a white rocking horse, similar to the one she had as a child at Crookie Hall. This one is certainly based on a rocking horse that she bought for their Paris apartment. Horses are important in Carrington's story. In magical practice, especially in witchcraft and shamanism, animals like horses often appear as guides or totemic embodiments of the self. Like Carrington, the horses in this painting are not passive subjects. They are active agents of escape and embodiments of freedom. As a child, she rode horses regularly, and it was one of the few parts of her childhood where she felt truly free and powerful. Riding gave her a taste of independence, speed, and physical strength, all things considered not proper for a young lady in her world. Horses are, of course, a big part of the traditional upper-class culture she grew up in. But for her, they were a symbol of her true self, wild and untamed, and they feature in many of her paintings as a form of alter ego. Further around the composition, we see an open window, framed by an elaborate curtain, pulled back, revealing the garden beyond, filled with tall cypress trees, reminiscent of Renaissance landscapes. Cypress trees in art symbolize mourning, death, and eternal life. Themes she would explore later in Another Life in Mexico. The open window hints at escape, and through it we see a white horse galloping across the landscape, while the rocking horse behind her is on display, as Carrington once was as a debutante, and can only stare out to the other horse, which is free. In Celtic mythology that so influenced her childhood, the white horse was sacred to the tribe of the Tuatha Danann. The horse could fly, run faster than the wind, and journey between worlds. Storytelling is crucial when discussing Carrington, and she was also celebrated for her short stories and plays. In one of her early plays, Penelope, a controlling father punishes his daughter by burning her beloved rocking horse. The girl decides to escape her stifling magic-free life by turning into a white colt and flying off into the unknown. For the girl in the play, and for Carrington, imagination was the antidote to reality. Horses also feature in the first painting she ever sold, which was bought by the American patron of the arts, Peggy Guggenheim, who would go on to champion her work in several key exhibitions. Guggenheim would also go on to marry Max Ernst in 1941. All types of animals feature in Carrington's paintings as instinctual and elemental, helping to transcend the boundary between reality and what the surrealists called the marvellous. The surrealist term, the marvellous, has been described as a place where dreams, chance, and irrationality converge, often through unexpected juxtapositions, symbolic imagery, and emotional intensity. Think of it as the spark of magic in the mundane, the moment when reality tilts just enough to reveal the strange, poetic, and profound underneath.
But the animal I got to know best was a young hyena.
Beneath the window stands a strange hyena. She has piercing blue human-like eyes and lactating teats. She is raising her leg to mirror Carrington's raised hand. Behind her, a faint smudge, described as ectoplasm, suggests that she has only just materialized. One of Carrington's most well-known short stories, The Debutante, sheds light on the hyena's presence. It was written around the same time as the self-portrait I am discussing here. In it, a young society girl befriends a hyena at the zoo and persuades it to attend a debutante ball in her place, the type of event that the young Leonora was forced to go to and despised. The hyena agrees and goes home with the girl to get ready. There, she kills and eats the maid Mary so she can wear her face as a disguise. While the hyena attends the ball, the girl stays home. But the ruse is discovered when the hyena fills the room with a terrible stench and devours Mary's stolen face in front of the guests, before leaping out of the window.
And they're wonderful animals because they eat garbage, which I think is such a great virtue.
Later in life, Carrington said, "I'm like a hyena. I get into the garbage cans. I have an insatiable curiosity." While Max Ernst played a key role early in Carrington's career, it was more as a catalyst than a mentorship. He introduced her to Paris's surrealist circle, but she quickly asserted her independence and rejected being seen as his muse or protégé.
Yes, well, the women surrealists, you see, were very secondary to the men in those days. The women were considered to be the muse, the people who were there to inspire and incidentally do the washing and do the cooking and do the cleaning, aside from inspiring, go to bed and so on. And they were not really, they were not considered to be artists, really.
After a year in Paris, Carrington and Ernst moved to the south of France, with the aim of creating an idyllic artistic retreat.
Having been ignored, a state of war once more exists between Great Britain and Germany.
However, the outbreak of World War II soon shattered that dream. In 1939, Ernst was arrested as an enemy alien due to his German citizenship.
Max was put by the Frenchmen in a concentration camp. I eventually went mad.
Carrington was distraught, campaigning obsessively for his release, which was eventually secured with help from influential friends. To mark his release, they painted portraits of each other. Carrington's portrait of Ernst, now a surrealist masterpiece, shows him as a bird-like shaman in a red coat, with a merman tail, holding a lantern containing a small horse. A frozen white horse in the background likely symbolises Carrington herself, who we now know was feeling trapped and unhappy in the relationship. We can read the portrait as both a love letter and as a farewell. Her short stories from this time express a hostility towards figures of masculine authority. In one, Pigeon Fly, an old man in striped stockings turns into a bird, dominating a young female artist until her art is no longer her own, and she fades away to nothing, a reflection of Carrington's own growing loss of self. Soon after, Ernst, whose work had been included in the Nazis' degenerate art exhibition of 1937, was arrested again, this time at gunpoint. With Europe at war, Carrington, in no fit state to make a decision, was reluctantly persuaded to flee to safety in Spain. And it was here that she suffered a mental breakdown and was eventually institutionalized in a psychiatric asylum in Madrid, against her will, and forcibly given powerful drugs. This, Carrington would say later, was her darkest time.
What it mainly did for me in a conscious way was to suddenly become aware that I was both mortal and touchable, and I could be destroyed. I didn't think so before.
At some point, she is transferred to Lisbon in Portugal, where she escapes from her guardian by climbing out of a bathroom window. Carrington's institutionalization marked a turning point. Rather than staying silent about the trauma, she transformed it into her surrealist memoir, confronting institutional violence, gaslighting, and the pathologizing of women's minds. She reframed her madness as visionary insight. In Lisbon, she married Renato Leduc, a Mexican diplomat she knew from Paris. It meant that she was safe from the medical establishment and could escape to Mexico. On the way, they stopped briefly in New York, a crucial bridge between her trauma in Europe and her reinvention in Mexico. In the early 1940s, New York became a refugee camp of creativity. Carrington joined figures like André Breton, Marcel Duchamp, Salvador Dalí, Maria Izquierdo, and Peggy Guggenheim, now married to Max Ernst. One of the first works she created in New York was this one, and as we can see, she was still very much affected by her recent experiences of enforced incarceration in the asylum. This is a self-portrait in which she is wearing a straitjacket. Carrington was getting more interested in the occult and magic, and we can see here that she is standing inside a magic circle, representing the ritual act of protection. At the bottom of the painting, we see a representation of the underworld that she will write about in her book about her time in the asylum. And we will see the underworld again in many of her paintings. As many surrealists fled the Nazis, the centre of the art world shifted from Paris to New York. Surrealism's call for liberation of the unconscious and rejection of social norms should have been ideal for women, but they were often cast as muses or symbolic figures rather than intellectual contributors. Carrington, however, rejected these limits, forging her own path without waiting for permission. Despite her personal turmoil, her work won acclaim, and Breton, the founder of the Surrealists, called her one of the most vital artists in New York. Unlike many of the male Surrealists fascinated by the subconscious and erotic desire, Carrington drew from Celtic myths, shapeshifters and folklore, creating a feminist language rich with magic and mystery. She also rejected the idea of a single interpretation, favouring open-ended meaning. As she pulled away from Surrealism's patriarchal structures, she centred women as powerful creators linked to the spiritual world. Today, it's clear that while men dominated Surrealism's early years, women like Carrington, Dorothea Tanning and Remedios Varo, amongst others, redefined its language and led it into fantastical new directions from the 1940s onwards. In 1942, Carrington moved to Mexico with Leduc, a lush, exotic landscape unlike anything she had ever known. It was a country that welcomed European émigrés and soon became a new hub for artists in exile. Here, Carrington was no longer seen as Ernst's ex-lover or the mad English girl. She was simply Leonora, artist, writer, visionary. We can almost feel the relief in this painting she created early on in Mexico. It is a self-portrait showing her leaving the ruins of Europe and its tumbling castles and flying towards a new dress and therefore a new identity, nestled in with her alter ego, the horse. In Mexico City, she met Spanish surrealist Remedios Varo, and they became creative soulmates, forming a kind of secret coven with photographer Katie Horner. Together, they created radical subversive art outside the male surrealist sphere, deeply inspired by alchemy, tarot, and astrology, as we can see here in Carrington's paintings Friday and Night of the Eight, as well as Varo's The Creation of the Birds. Mexico's indigenous cosmologies and mystical Catholic traditions resonated with Carrington's mythic imagination. We see it in this painting, named after the ancient Celtic Day of the Dead on November the 1st, where, like the Mexican Day of the Dead, ancestors rejoin their dead relatives. Drawing from Catholicism, Judaism, Hinduism, and Tibetan Buddhism, she blended myth, folklore, and the occult to explore themes of alchemy, mysticism, and transmutation, changing from one form to another, which became a major theme. Carrington met Americo Weiss, also known as Chicky, a Hungarian-born photographer and refugee, and they had two sons, Gabriel and Pablo. Their relationship was close, but allowed for the kind of independence Carrington fiercely valued.
Once you cross the border and you arrived in Mexico, you feel that you're coming to a place that's haunted, the presence of spirits, whatever spirits are.
She co-funded the women's movement in Mexico and carved out a space where she could be a mother, a political activist, a painter, a sculptor, and a writer, all without being forced to choose one identity over another. It was in Mexico that she created one of her most iconic pieces, the Giantess, which is indicative of this new, stable and confident Carrington, and at the same time encapsulates many of the reoccurring themes in her work. The monumental female figure is a vision of feminine cosmic authority, whose exaggerated scale emphasizes her divine Earth Mother qualities, a protector and a powerful feminine presence. Carrington had left behind the rigid social structures of England and the male-dominated surrealist circles of Europe, and found in Mexico an inclusive artistic community and an intellectual sisterhood. She was far away from the gender constraints and class expectations that had stifled her earlier. In Mexico, Carrington had found a home.
I think that's a good story.
Gives one a lot to speculate on.
Carrington's Inn of the Dawn Horse is more than a self-portrait, it's a point of departure, painted on the cusp of war, exile and transformation. It shows a young woman not as a muse or subject, but as a myth-maker poised between the known and the unseen. Surrounded by symbols of freedom, rebellion and the subconscious, Carrington offers not a fixed identity, but a vision of becoming. For her, painting was a way to explore the self and process trauma, existing beyond logic and linear thinking.
You want to turn things into a kind of intellectual game. It's not.
She believed painting should be felt, not interpreted. Great art explained never claims to offer a definitive history, and hopefully leaves room for individual response, just as Carrington intended. She didn't want her work explained, but she did welcome personal, meaningful reactions, even if she wouldn't confirm they were correct.
Well, I don't really think in terms of explanation.
In a surrealist world where women were often cast as passive muses or objects, Carrington, early on in her career, claimed authority over her image, over her inner world and her ideas. Carrington's refusal to explain her symbolism was not evasive but protective, defending the sacred, imaginative space where her art was born.
I don't feel that I know anything. Probably nice if I could sit back and say, I know now. But I don't.